While a great victory had been won at the Battle of the Hornburg, the fate of Middle-earth still hung in the balance, with Sauron maintaining the upper hand in spite of the loss of his most powerful servant Saruman and the might of Isengard. The Dark Lord had bred hundreds of thousands of orcs, as well as his own variation of the Uruk-hai, in the depths of Mordor, and looked poised to force the Men of the West into one final battle to decisively end the War of the Ring. But before the famous Battle of the Pelennor Fields, we need to see how the opposing forces approached Gondor, and how Captain Faramir tried to buy time for the allies to arrive at the Second Battle of Osgiliath and the Battle of Rammas Echor. It's hard to keep your lands with the armies of evil on the march, and luckily in our world, securing your personal fief is much easier, thanks to our sponsor, Established Titles. They let you become a lord or lady by purchasing a little plot of land in Scotland, where all landowners can claim these titles. But it's also a project to reforest the world, planting a tree with every order, preserving picturesque woodland and biodiversity, and supporting global charities like One Tree Planted and Trees for the Future. You'll get at least 1 square foot of land in Scotland with a certificate to identify the plot and prove your noble claim. This allows you to get Lord or Lady on your credit cards, plane tickets, and more. They also offer maps to show your new estate, including the immensely detailed hand-drawn 1611 map by John Speed, held by the National Library of Scotland. Mother's Day is right around the corner, and a noble title makes a pretty special gift. You're in luck then, as Established Titles has a massive Mother's Day sale. Plus, if you use our code WIZARDS, you'll get an extra 10% off. Go to establishedtitles.com/wizards to get your gifts now and help support the channel. Following on from the Battle of the Hornburg, Gandalf, accompanied by Theoden, Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli, Treebeard, Merry and Pippin, approached the imposing might of Isengard, which the Ents could not breach due to its superior Númenórean design, and confronted Saruman, who, spiteful and proud even in defeat, refused the pleas of Gandalf to surrender, forcing the White Wizard to reluctantly expel his former friend from the Order, destroying his staff and leaving him powerless. Grima Wormtongue also refused the mercy of King Theoden, instead hurling Saruman's palantir at the king, narrowly missing him. Ever curious, Pippin dived into the watery depths now encompassing the fortress, recovering the palantir which had been corrupted by Sauron. The young hobbit came face to face with the Dark Lord himself, but paralysed by fear, said nothing. Still, his presence confirmed the defeat of Saruman, driving an icy shard of fear into Sauron. In the meantime, Saruman was left to his own devices, with the Ents to serve as his keepers. Upon returning to Helm's Deep, the group was met by the Grey Company, consisting of the remaining 31 members of the Dunedain, led by Aragorn's lieutenant Halbarad, and the twin sons of Elrond, Elladan and Elrohir. They brought with them advice from Galadriel and Elrond, as well as a standard made by Arwen, depicting the white tree upon a black background, with a crown placed above the tree, symbolizing what was to come. The decision was made that the heir of Isildur must make his presence known to his greatest adversary. Gazing deep within the palantir, and holding the reforged blade, Andúril, Flame of the West, Aragorn confronted the Dark Lord, revealing that the heir of Isildur was soon to return as King of Gondor. Believing that Aragorn was now in possession of the One Ring, while also about to unite all of the free folk of Middle-earth behind his banner, the Dark Lord panicked. His well-laid plans were hastened, as he now saw the need for a preemptive strike on Gondor before Aragorn could assume the throne. Having been shown the sheer might of Sauron's forces through the Palantir, Aragorn was also forced to take desperate measures, in this instance departing the now rallying Rohirrim to walk the paths of the dead in order to save his people. Gandalf left the king to continue his muster, taking Pippin with him to Minas Tirith with all the haste his mount Shadowfax could muster, and before long they came before the Rammas Echor, or the Long Wall as it was often called. This fortification served as Minas Tirith's second line of defence should Osgiliath fall, consisting of a large wall which took an elliptical course around the plains of Pelennor. At its centre stood the Causeway Forts, twin towers that could be held against large numbers. Yet, in a sign of the decaying strength of the kingdom, these walls had been left to the elements for many years, and when passing through, Gandalf and Pippin witnessed hasty and desperate attempts to patch up the fortifications. Further adding to the woes of the Gondorians, they no longer possessed enough soldiers to man the unwieldy defences. Arriving at the city, Pippin was overtaken by its sheer size and majesty. Yet Gandalf was not as impressed, seeing a city resigned to its defeat, as the majority of the citizenry had been sent out into the fiefdoms of the kingdom, and a rallying call had been sent out by the steward Denethor. However, the threat of an incoming fleet of corsairs from Umbar had severely limited the numbers sent from the outlying regions of Gondor. The muster itself amounted to 200 well-armed men from Lossarnach, 300 from Ringlow Vale, 500 bowmen from Morthond, 150 scantily equipped levies from Anfalas, 50 hillmen from Larnedon, 100 fisherfolk from Ethir Anduin, 300 from Pinath Gelin, and 1,200 men from Dol Amroth. The latter were led by the Prince of Dol Amroth, Imrahil, who immediately assumed a leadership role in the defence of the city. He brought with him the very flower of the Gondorian forces, the heavily armed and armoured Swan Knights, the only known horsemen in Middle-earth who could potentially best their Rohirrim allies. While each of these men did not lack for valour or the willingness to die for their land, their strength and numbers were lower than any time before. Arriving within the Tower of Ecthelion, Gandalf was left even more worried by the mental state of Denethor, steward of Gondor, who appeared to be completely distraught due to the death of his son Boromir, as well as the pervading influence of Sauron through his usage of the Palantir of Minas Tirith. Pippin, feeling responsible for the loss of the steward's son at the hands of the Uruk-hai at Amon Hen, immediately pledged himself to the steward and was brought into Denethor's service. Meanwhile, Faramir had ordered his company of Rangers of Ithilien to reinforce the garrison of Osgiliath, and then returned to Minas Tirith, chased by the fell beasts of the Nazgul, and barely made it inside the walls due to the timely intervention of Gandalf, who flew through the gates of the city upon his steed Shadowfax. He revealed his true power upon that day, driving back the Nine with the might of his power, and even making the Witch King recoil in what resembled fear if he could still feel such a human emotion. Faramir then informed his father, as well as Gandalf and Pippin, of the survival of Frodo and Sam, as well as their continued travels towards the Morgul Vale. Denethor was furious with the failure of his son to bring the One Ring to Gondor, and lamented that he had lived and Boromir had not, before sending his son to hold the western portion of Osgiliath at all costs, a strategy which Faramir disagreed with, knowing that it most likely would cost him his life. Ever the most dutiful of sons, Faramir took up this responsibility, but not before saying to his father, "Then farewell, but if I should return, think better of me," and hearing, "That depends on the manner of your return," in response. Faramir returned to Osgiliath that same day, and began to make ready the defences of the city, of which they only maintained control of the western portion. The eastern portion lay in the hands of a massive horde of orcs, which was estimated to number between 70 and 100,000, and while overall command was given to the Witch King of Angmar, his lieutenant Gothmog was an adept strategist. He had commanded the orcs stationed on the eastern bank of the Anduin to create as many barges as they could, in order to ferry their forces over the mighty river. On the 9th and 10th of March, the Dark Lord sent a foul cloud from Mordor, covering the lands of Rohan and Gondor in darkness for 2 days, sapping the strength and will of the men of the West as the dawn never arrived. On the same day, a behemoth force emerged from the Black Gate, and force marched itself all the way to Caer Andros, capturing the island in the hopes of cutting off the Rohirrim relief force, which had completed its muster at Dunharrow, while simultaneously another smaller army marched from Minas Morgul to bolster the forces at Osgiliath. Theoden had honoured the pledge of Eorl the Young and assembled 6,000 cavalrymen, among them his niece Eowyn and Merry, disguised among his riders. This was all he could manage in the time allotted to him, but it remained uncertain as to whether or not they would arrive in time. Meanwhile, Aragorn was leading the Grey Company, Gimli and Legolas, through the paths of the dead. His plan was to recruit the dead men of Dunharrow, who betrayed their oath to Isildur during the War of the Last Alliance. As the heir of Isildur, Aragorn had the ability to release them from their oath and undead existence, so the dead men joined him. At the same time, the Orcish host alongside their Haradrim reinforcements attacked Osgiliath on the 11th of March. The Rangers of Ithilien and Gondorian regulars made the hordes of orcs pay for every step they took through the former capital, and proved their worth despite the unfavourable odds. After a day of fighting, however, the weight of numbers soon took its toll, pushing the men of Gondor from the city and forcing them to take up further positions along the Rammas Echor. The fighting was at its fiercest at the Causeway forts, as Faramir personally led the defence here, and knowing that time was of the essence, refused to give an inch of ground to the forces of Mordor. The Rammas Echor was too large a bastion to hold, given the numbers provided to the young captain of Gondor, and having held another day here, they were forced into a retreat on the 13th of March. What started as an orderly withdrawal soon turned into a rout, as the battered and broken forces of Gondor attempted to make their way back to the White City. Yet the Pelennor fields offered no cover to Faramir or his men. They were overtaken by the forces of the Dark Lord, and a fierce melee ensued in which Faramir was struck down by a poisonous dart commonly used by the forces of the Southrons, and left near death. His men, loyal to their captain above all else, shielded his body and stood willing to fight to the last man if it meant saving their leader. This proved unnecessary, however, as Prince Imrahil, despite orders to avoid any engagements outside of the walls of the city by the Lord Denethor, led a sortie of his Swan Knights. The sheer ferocity and strength of these scions of an age long since past saved the lives of the remainder of the garrison of Osgiliath, their swan-shaped helms driving fear into the hearts of the orcs and Southrons, who themselves turned to rout. With Gandalf once more driving off the Nazgûl, who had grown to fear the light of Istari once more, Imrahil, coming upon the stricken body of his friend and nephew, hoisted Faramir upon his horse and rode back to the city with all haste in search of a healer. Upon hearing of his son's injury, Denethor finally gave way to madness, locking himself within the White Tower, preparing a pyre for himself and his son to burn upon, despite Pippin's protestations. That left the defence of the city to Gandalf, who was aided by the immensely capable Prince Imrahil, with the regular forces of Gondor joined by the survivors of the Rammas Echor. While the defeat at Osgiliath had been resounding, and Faramir's injury deprived them of another capable leader for the battle which was to come, the time he had bought in his desperate defence would prove pivotal in giving time for the Rohirrim to arrive and fulfill their oaths. This had been symbolised by the Red Arrow of Iorl, which had been presented to King Theoden at Dunharrow, a gesture which once again called upon the old oaths of friendship to be fulfilled. So began the Siege of Gondor, the conflict which would forever alter the course of the history of Middle-earth, and decide whether it would be the Age of Man, or the Age of the Orc which would come to eclipse the fading light of the Elves in the years to come. Much of this hinged on whether the diminished blood of Númenor, in the guise of the steadfast Gondorian defenders, could hold out long enough for relief to arrive. Yet in the face of such darkness, this rested on naught more than a fool's hope, which Gandalf the White believed may be just enough to hold the darkness at bay as Frodo and Sam advanced ever closer to the flames of Mount Doom and the salvation of the peoples of Middle-earth. This brings us to the Battle of Pelennor Fields. However, this is the story for our next documentary on the history of Middle-earth. Thanks again to our sponsor, Established Titles. Buy a small plot of land in Scotland and become a lady or a lord, or give this title as an amazing and easy gift. In return, Established Titles plants a tree to protect the pristine forests of our planet. Take advantage of their Mother's Day sale to pick up the perfect gift and use our discount code WIZARDS at establishedtitles.com/wizards to get a further 10% off. The next few videos in this series will be dedicated to the concluding battles of the War of the Ring. But we're planning to cover the battles of many other fantasy, sci-fi and space opera universes, so make sure you have subscribed and pressed the bell button. Please consider liking and sharing, as it helps immensely. And don't forget to comment. We'll try to read and respond to every comment, as we want to know what you think about this video and which videos you hope to see in the future. This is the Wizards and Warriors channel, and we'll catch you on the next one.